first thing they're going to learn is how significant this stage is for people who are born with ovaries. Most of us and our training has really emphasized that we need to, part of what we need to do is make sense of what our clients are experiencing through a developmental lens. And I think we're very good at that for those who work with children and adolescents and maybe elderly, like we really kind of bring that developmental understanding to the table. But there's this kind of stage when we hit adulthood that perhaps we don't tune as much into the nuances within that stage, the different stages within the stages of, midlife in particular is its own stage. And not only is its own stage where there's some typical characteristics of what life tends to be looking at and, experiencing, and the stresses and the demands that are typical of midlife, but there is this whole hormonal experience that is concurrent to that. And we definitely haven't paid enough attention to it. And yet it actually has a really, really significant impact on our mental health and our physical health and our capacity and how we view ourselves and others and our relationships. And I know from my training, and I also know from having lectured more recently in masters, clin masters programs and things, that I know they're trying to cram a heck of a lot into those programs, but this is not at all discussed. And yet the impacts on mental health and psychological kind of development and the psychology of a person is really, really significant at this stage. So definitely from the workshop, I think it will be a bit like lifting the veil of, oh my gosh, okay, there is so much that we need to understand about this stage in order to best support our clients. I think the other thing is that people will learn that we need to start really thinking about this with clients, as I said, who are born with ovaries from our late 30s. And we're actually in our menopausal transition, which has a number of stages, and it generally starts late 30s, early 40s for the rest of our life. So we spend half our life in these various stages of transition through what they would call the menopausal kind of years. And that in itself is really significant. It's really relevant to understand how early that this actually begins as well, because most of us, if we have some idea about menopause, if we've ever turned our mind to it, we're probably more thinking around the age of late 40s, early 50s, and that's just incorrect. I think it's also really important to understand that some people will actually experience menopause far earlier, and that's called premature menopause. And that can happen just kind of because, but there's also the realities and experience of what's called surgical and chemical menopause. And that's where, for various reasons, women begin menopause more usually in response to other kind of health issues that they're needing to kind of manage. And so we can actually be even younger when it really occurs. But if we're referring to natural menopause, it starts in the late 30s. So essentially, if you're sitting in front of anyone who was born with ovaries, who's kind of here moving towards that late 30s and on, then this is really, really relevant for us to know. And as mental health professionals, what's really important to know is that a lot of the mental health issues, even if they're a recurrence of prior mental health issues, and certainly if they're a first-time presentation, the etiology, the origin and the cause of those mental health relapses and or first-time occurrence is largely hormonal. And so we need to really know that, because the approach is most likely going to need to be slightly different enough that if you don't know this, you may not be able to help your client as much as you'd like and as much as they'd like as well. And so I think that's really, really important. This is where treatment resistance, for example, can come into play, because we're using the same things we would normally use for people who've perhaps experienced depression before, or even if it is the first time, or anxiety. It can look, we will approach it similarly, whether it's depression, whether it's anxiety, whether traumas re-emerging, those kinds of things, we would use the usual tools. And it's not like they're that we won't use them, but we would most likely need to also be incorporating other elements into our treatment in order to be effective. And so that's super important as well.